Hello everyone, welcome to the Spartan Update. I'm guest host Logan Kaplan today, here with our special guest John McCarthy and Haley Morrow. It is a cool 55 degrees and cloudy outside, and it is the 2 days before Thanksgiving, so in November 22nd, right? November 22nd, 2023. So first up, John McCarthy, welcome to the Spartan Update podcast.
Thanks for having me here. Very excited to be here. Yeah, I appreciate it. Super looking forward to it.
So we're going to get started right off the bat. We want to know your background. You grew up in Ocean. You were in this class, and you're on the board now. You've done a lot of different things in your life. I'd like to hear all about it.
Awesome. So I grew up in Ocean Township, graduated from Ocean in 2008. I left, went to college, graduated from there in 2012. The year before I graduated, I attended Officers Candidate School in the United States Marine Corps. So when I graduated, I commissioned as a second lieutenant. I spent 7 years in the Marine Corps and then got out of that, came back to the Virginia area, but still wasn't living close to here. And then about 2019, we moved back to Ocean Township, lived all over the world and decided I was going to move here, chose to live back in Ocean Township. Set up a little setup with my mother so that she can live with my wife and I and the kids because I was the only child. So, got to take care of mom. Did that. And then 2020, I think it was like 2019 going into 2020, I did decide to run for the Board of Education just to try to give back to the high school and be a part of that because all the school district, just because Ocean Township helped to make me the man I am today. So I wanted to make sure that I was participating and aiding in the development of the future of our town and our community.
I'm really excited to talk to you about civic responsibility. But first, I know someone in this room wants to hear a bit about your high school experience, what it was like for you to be on the Spartan Update. And we want to have this all cataloged.
No, we should. Yeah. Mr. Polano, I owe a lot to him. He was extremely formative in my development as a man. Wouldn't have made it through high school without him. Wouldn't have made it through high school without him. I'm kidding. He's awful. He's the worst. No, seriously though, what we have here, right, in Ocean Township, I think is very appreciated now. I think when the TV Productions Group was initially created, I think it was vastly underappreciated, not due to any intention, people were trying to underappreciate it or trying to avoid it. I think people just weren't as aware of it now. I think now it's very obvious to a lot of people that this is a real gem in this school. I think that specifically has to do with the fact that a lot of people are very into this stuff, that marketing has become such a huge phenomenon. It's become a lot easier of a thing for all of us to accomplish, but also it's had a lot to do with Mr. Polano really being at the forefront of technology with all of these things and different mediums to reach different audiences. And he's bringing that to our school every day. And we're really fortunate for that. And it's been an awesome thing. And it really was an awesome thing even when I was here in 2008. And technology has advanced so much further now. Since then, it kind of blows you away. Like back then, you still needed all kinds of special cameras to do certain things. And Mr. Polano would argue to you that the product is not as good if you're not using those things currently. But nowadays, you guys have the ability to just kind of whip out your phone and you could videotape anything and have a video edited and up on your favorite social media platform within 20 minutes. When we did it, it was, week-long production to attempt to reach something.
All right. So what are some of the productions you did while you were on the show?
We did, the Ocean Spartan Network we had OSPN. That was specifically geared towards sports at the school. Then we also had Dubs, which was like the Wednesday show. Everybody wanted to be on Dubs. It was the more fun show at the time. And people would just there was really no rules to that. And then Spartan Update was specifically reviewing events and current events and things like that would occur. And so that would go on every week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So Wednesday you'd have Dubs, Thursday you'd have OSPN, and then Friday you would have Spartan Update. I was specifically responsible for the production and development of OSPN. That was my flagship in that area. But then we had Dubs and Spartan Update that I would also assist in helping with. And Dubs was a lot of fun, and we would do more gag bits, right? Like I'd equate that more to an SNL, like a Saturday Night Live type show. And then Spartan Update was a little bit more serious, but we had some really good bits, that we would go out and do. We had some challenge shows. I think I can remember chugging like an entire bottle of clam juice in here, which was really disgusting. And then we had John McCarthy or JMac hits Ocean Township, where I'd go out with a microphone and tap people in the face with it after asking the questions until they were kind of outside of their comfort zone and wondering what was happening during the interview. And then the what was it? The Student Programming Network, I think is what it was called. But basically it was, we would film and compete in video contests and stuff like that. And I think we won thousands of dollars. I think like $10,000 is how much we won for the school to like add into our facilities and things like that by participating in a few different TV show network contests where we would submit videos and win. It was a lot of fun. And a very famous character from that time was a guy by the name of Chuck Vanderloo, who used to make appearances pretty frequently. He was very good at what he did, and he would do a lot of bits. So yeah.
Awesome. All right. So I want to try to dive into some of the stuff regarding civic responsibility. So I was watching this movie last night. I'm sure you've probably seen it. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
I haven't seen it.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a fantastic movie.
Yeah. What's it about?
It's with Jimmy Stewart from It's a Wonderful Life. It's basically this man, this senator dies in a local district, and the governor has to appoint someone.
State senator or national senator?
National senator.
Okay.
And this man, and he ends up picking this guy because he wants to seem popular. So he picks this guy out of a hat, basically a Boy Scout leader who's played by Jimmy Stewart.
Nice.
And he's just sent to Washington, and it's all about how he's going in and he wants to get this special park built for the thing. And it's about how, in large part, how this basic giant bureaucracy kind of crams down on him and beats him down. This was made in 1939, and he's just trying to basically...
Oh, this is a real old movie.
It is a very old movie.
Oh, wow. So it's like black and white?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's a fantastic movie about civic responsibility.
Yeah.
And you've had a very large role in your life in civic responsibility. You've joined the military. You're now a part of a school board. Why is it important to you? And beyond that, what do you think the role everyone should have as a citizen of the United States should be?
That's a great question. I'm going to have to check that movie out, definitely.
Definitely.
Are you going to ask any questions today, or are you just here to scare me?
I don't know. Logan's got all the questions.
We thought we were going to have a different host in here today.
Oh, no, that's great. That's good, though. I'm glad. Feel free to jump in whenever
Absolutely.
you want. No, I think specifically it starts with gratitude, right? So I think that there needs to be some sort of level of gratefulness for what you have and for what people have come before you and built for you to be able to be in the position that you're in, right? So I think it starts specifically with gratitude and a thankfulness and a gratefulness for the people that have created things that have existed as areas for you to walk forward and to be successful in your life, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's a huge deal. I think that one of the problems that we have as a society is that not very many of us even tend to comprehend what is set up for us for success, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and it starts very basic, like the lights that we have in this room. How is this here? Well, there is an entire framework and infrastructure that exists to ensure that we have this here. And we have taken that for granted because it has existed for so long that nobody even remembers what it used to be like to not have that kind of thing, to not have electric into a building or something like that. And heat goes the same way, right? And these are very simple concepts, but I use this to expand on it and to say it's the same thing for the school that is here. It's the same thing for the program that Mr. Polano has created for all of you and that the students before you have created, right? You have to be grateful for that. Well, the same thing goes for this town. The same thing goes for this country. The same thing goes for many of the institutions that exist. There were people who struggled to build the framework, which we all know is the hardest part, right? Like creating something out of nothing is the most difficult thing that you can do. Keeping something in motion when someone has already thrust it forward into motion is actually relatively easy. You just kind of have to avoid catastrophic failure. So I think it starts with gratitude and then an understanding that someone else needs to take up the mantle and move forward and say, hey, this is what I'm going to do to help support my town, to support my nation, to do these things, because if not me, then who? Right. And to be very clear about that, one of the things that you run into a lot when you talk to people about serving in any capacity, right? And service can be on the grandest scale. You know, I think that as a society, we really view the military as kind of the ultimate form of service. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that there are more. Having done that, right, it's also kind of the most fun in a lot of ways. Being in the military is a lot of fun. I mean, of course, it's an awful situation when you have to make the ultimate sacrifice, but that's a whole other, that's an exception, not the rule, especially as of late with technology. That's a whole other rabbit hole we can go down. But I bring this up to say that like, they're even just starting a garden in your neighborhood, right? Even just creating like a local food drive and collecting cans in your neighborhood. Doing something small is some level of service that you can give back, and it's a huge help and a net positive into the world around you. And I think that's where we've kind of lost sight, is a lot of people, we've got this all or nothing mentality. I can only do this kind of service or that kind of service, and that even the simplest thing isn't really going to make a big difference, but it actually will. And you tend to run into this constant, like, I'm too busy. I've got all these other things going on. And I would argue we all are too busy. We all have a million things going on, but we have to prioritize that service to our people, because if some of us don't start doing it, all of us will have nothing left.
Mm-hmm. Recently, especially after COVID, but this has been going on much before COVID, there's been a sharp decline in a lot of what would say American values. I was reading a thing from, I think it was the Wall Street Journal. They were taking polls on things people do, things that people find important. Americans that attend church nowadays, it's only, or are involved in their communities in a serious capacity, is only down to about 20%. It was things like the value of having children is down only about 22%. And then there's some other ones where it's very concerning. The only value that seems to have gone up is the value in making money. And it was a slight increase. This poll was taken, I believe, from 1998, 2019, and 2023. Why do you think that is, and how do you think we can restore a lot of the institutions that have seemingly faltered over the course of the last decades?
That's a great question too. So my theory about this, and just to kind of give you a lens for the framework that I have, that I view the world through, right? Mm-hmm. I did study sociology in college, right? And so, and I focused on social psychology, okay? But there's a big focus on philosophy in a lot of that, because you have to understand certain lenses and frameworks to view the world in order to form your own opinions, and it's helpful to see some of the great thinkers that have come behind you, right? But one of the most, I think, prolific and popular theories currently is this theory of postmodernism, right? And that we're entering into modernity, okay? And one of the theories of that is that, and you can go down this rabbit hole very far, right? But basically the theory is that we're moving away from viewing institutions as something that is sacred and important in our society and something that we need. And this is forcing us to kind of also remove the values that those institutions tell us to place on a pedestal. So those things are kind of like falling by the wayside, because we're being told, and we're growing into a society that is more worshiping themselves,
yes,
right? Like narcissism tends to be the highest that it has ever been, right? And narcissism, for the layperson, or because we always want to explain these things as much as possible, is basically just the worship of oneself,
yes,
right? It's being selfish and considering yourself as the center of the universe. As that expands, people start to put less of a precedent on institutions, and then those values and those beliefs that those certain institutions hold become less important to people, right? And what were the two things you brought up? Attending church and having children.
Having
right?
children.
And those are two things. Amazingly, those two things, attending church and having children, are actually pretty well tied together, right? Like the church has always tried to, depending on which denomination you're speaking about, they've always tried to proliferate people having more children, right? Because they understand that this is a part of our society that we are very dependent upon. So it's ironic that those are the things. Now, you can play devil's advocate in all of this, right? We can look at some of these institutions and see some major failures that they have made, right? Specifically, you could look at the church and you could make those comments, absolutely, right? But of the whole, I would argue that those failures are kind of a blip on the radar of the amount of good that they've created for society. And one of the difficult things, I think, is that we're going to come to a point as a society where we're going to need to find somewhere to identify values that we hold sacred, right? And where that's going to be, if there aren't certain institutions creating that for us, is going to be a big question, because otherwise, as narcissism increases, every single individual in our society is going to kind of set their own precedent on what values are the most important. And then what do we strive for as a group if we can't even come to agree on what we think is most important as a society? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Kind of a long-winded way to say it, yeah?
It's interesting. So, like, among those things, like, drug use is up, suicide is up to like unprecedented levels. You see a large, sharp increase, I think, with regards to this. The smartphone, you look 2008, there's almost a linear pattern between the people's attention to their social media. Because I feel like it was different like when you had TV or computers in your house, because you sit there, you'd be there for an hour, then you go off and you go in the real world. Now it follows you everywhere. It's not like it just didn't like where you sit down in front of the TV, and that was concerning. And that, I guess, draws you into narcissism, because it's basically a self-loathing machine. You have people, you want to see what they're thinking about you. You want to see what people are saying about you or sending to you. And I think it kind of feeds into the narcissism thing. So I guess where do you think people...
I want to talk about that though real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what...
So I had a professor in college who's a sociology professor. He was a social theory professor. He made a really good point. So you guys are probably not... I mean, are you even familiar with the way Facebook was initially set up? Did you guys ever like see Facebook? Probably not, right?
No.
Okay, so the way Facebook used to be set up was that at the top of the page was like your photo, right? And then the information about you. Mm-hmm. And then underneath you was that feed, right? And that feed would be like people commenting, you sharing things that you thought were important, photos that people would share with you, right? That's like what would pop into your feed. But at the top of it was always your face, right? Mm-hmm. And so I had this professor who used to make the claim that, you know, ancient societies worshipped totems, right? Mm-hmm. And on a totem pole, the highest, the most highly regarded item was at the top, right? Like the thing that we cared about the most
interesting.
Was at the top of the totem pole. And if you look at the way that a social media page is set up, what's always sitting at the top, even on Instagram. I don't look at TikTok. I don't go on that because I don't support that platform. I have major issues with it. Mm-hmm. But like even on Instagram, you can still see it's the individual who holds the profile. It's their faces at the top. Ironically, though, like their face has shrunken because now the profile is their entire. It's just all them, right? Like it went from being photos of you with your friends and things like that to now it's literally the entire totem has expanded. It's not just you at the top. Now it's just like you everywhere, all the way down, right? And that's a little crazy and it's kind of creepy. And even we look at the show on Netflix, Black Mirror. Have you heard of that show, Black Mirror? It's kind of a creepy show and it's more new agey and it's about like a dystopian society and it's a bunch of different shorts that they put forward, they like what society could turn into with technology. And they go really crazy with these certain things. So like one of the episodes is the removal of phones. They don't exist anymore. Everybody wears like a lens, and that lens is something that you can click into, and you can view everything that you need to view on your phone there. You can watch videos that way. Like
I think that exists.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised with Google Glasses.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Or even VR to a degree.
Right. VR to a degree. 100%. Yeah. But so like that was a concept that they brought forward, right? That these things can expand and get even worse. And so in the episode, and they have, you know, multiple seasons, but in the episode, it's just a single individual is now like, he's just always on this lens and he's always paying attention to it. It's the only thing that he can ever watch, right? Mm-hmm. He's always just doing that. And so he just completely detaches from society. He's not even talking to his wife. He's not really around for his kids. He's just always watching what's on the lens in front of him, and he kind of completely veers off. And I think that we run into like a major risk of that as a society by having this thing attached to us all the time. I mean, look at me. I've got two in front of me right now, right?
Why is that?
I have a work phone and a personal phone, which honestly I think is actually a great thing.
That's smart.
Because now you detach completely. So when I go home, the work phone goes on the charger and it goes on silent, right? And then frankly, it's kind of forced me to just take the other phone and put it on the charger and walk away too. Because everybody that I need to talk to is right in front of me, mm-hmm. right? So it's like, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But yeah, so these things follow us around, and now we see, and I feel like it's even becoming cliche, but we're not doing anything about it, right? Like how many people do you meet who are like, yeah, I went out to the restaurant the other night and this whole family was on their phones the whole time.
Exactly.
Like everybody says that, but there's no social norm being created to say like, what are you doing? You know, like
exactly.
If you replace those phones, I always say if you replace the phones with like cigarettes or Binkies, you know, like a child's pacifier, like every time you go to pull your phone out, like you're getting a couple little sucks out of your Binky. Like people would be like, what are you doing? We would like flip out, you know, and ask people why they're all about these things. But because it's this device that we can connect to the world, it's like, okay.
I will say it's concerning. This generation that's currently the kids that are being brought up now maybe the first generation that's ever not raised by humans to a large extent. I see even with my cousin, they are on their iPads way too much. Parents, because, parenting's hard, so they just put it in front of them. It's a babysitter because they sit there and they just kind of get sucked in to whatever game they're playing, whatever video they're watching. And it's really concerning. So I guess with all this, and this is a very big question, so you probably don't have the answer, but I'd be curious some ideas you may have. How do we solve this? How do we fix this? What can individuals do to better prevent this from being some sort of catastrophic ending?
I think a huge part, and you touched on this with what you spoke about initially, a huge part has to do with the access to social media, right? And much like young minds need to be protected until they have the ability to make decisions for themselves, right? Like, we are a society that has for a long time shepherded the youth through their natural development in life until they finally reach a point where we believe they can be independent of us. And we can argue about when that point is, whether it's 18 or 21 or when the brain is fully developed and all these kinds of things. But we've always, like, if you're going to drive a car, well, you're going to start with a permit, right? And there's going to be somebody sitting next to you for the first few times that you're using this thing because it's very lethal and dangerous, right? If you're going to decide to join the military under the age of 18, you need a parent to come and sign off on that, right? They have to be able to do that as a guardian. You can't vote until you're 18, right? All of these things. And this isn't super popular, and this is at the risk of sounding like a boomer, but like, you guys probably shouldn't be able to go on social media until you turn 14, 15 years old. And I would argue that that's because that's the time frame, like high school. High school is like when you are starting to try to develop socially in the world, right? You're playing with some other concepts that you maybe are going to be testing out to go utilize later in life, right? And we don't want to be like a society that just doesn't allow you to adopt new technology, right? Because that would be stupid too. Then we would fall behind in some other country that allows the youth to completely adopt technology at an early age would completely blow us out of the water, right? But we want to do so in a method that maybe is beneficial for all of you, right? Because, let's think about it. Anxiety and depression, they're at the highest levels they've ever been in the history of our country, right? There's got to be a cause for that. And some people would make an argument that the reason that they're so high is just because we finally identified what they are. And they've always existed, and that mom and dad have had anxiety and depression, and we just didn't call it the right thing because we were in denial as a society. And I see you shaking your head. I would disagree with that as well. Would you disagree with that comment?
Yeah, I disagree. I think, and also to a degree, I think certain people, like say you go back to World War II, everyone kind of went through the same horrible experiences. Everyone went through depression. Everyone went through the war. Everyone went through a war or two wars. So a lot of people who do have slightly different experiences, because now people have such unique experiences that if they have a unique experience and they can't really relate with others, like if someone loses a child or if someone has an issue like that, they're more likely to feel it because there aren't as many people that they can relate to because everyone lives such different lives as a part of the narcissism thing.
That's a good point.
Talking about before.
Then the war thing that's a whole other concept. That's a great concept to discuss because the war thing, in World War II, you went and fought against the Nazis or you went and fought against Imperial Japan. There was a long ship ride home with your entire unit before you got back, right? That was a huge deal. Like a long, long trip back home where you could decompress, right? You could process what went on over there, and arguably what went on over there was bad, right?
Absolutely.
Even if you just look at the casualty rates of World War II compared to recent conflict,
Absolutely.
Way worse, right? But they managed to process this in a different way. Now, I'm not saying that it was perfect, but I am saying that the levels of PTSD are far higher now than they were then, right? And again, we get into this concept that's because it wasn't known then and they weren't diagnosing it. And I would argue that part of that is true, right? Part of that is definitely true. They weren't diagnosing these things. But just like anxiety and depression, to bring the whole thing full circle, there's no way that we have always been at the rates that we're at right now throughout history. I don't believe that that's the case. And I do believe that these people that are struggling with anxiety and depression are dealing with very real issues that are a huge problem. A huge part of me believes too, though, that as a society, it's kind of become in vogue to say oh, this is making me anxious, right? And misdiagnosing an emotion or a response can be a big issue and can cause, I think, propagate that response. Where if you say that everything makes you anxious, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and more things start to make you anxious, right? But that being said, I think that the cause of all this anxiety, all of this depression, is that we're constantly looking at something that is showing us where we are falling short or where we need to continue to worship ourselves, right? And we have coalesced as a civilization for thousands of years, caring about a community, right? And a group. And like, this is why the term tribe has become so popular and all these things, is we have grown as a society to live together in big groups and to participate in great things together and to celebrate each other's accomplishments together, not privately alone in a room.
Do you think there's an over-medicalization we're having going on to the human condition?
Yeah, I mean, well, you can't disagree. Look at this, and this is just my personal opinion. Sorry for hitting the table, but this is just my personal opinion, and I could be wrong, but you can't disagree with the fact that there seems to be a lot of prescription of things in our society, right? Like that we've become more of a pill-focused society, meaning like, here's an issue, give them a pill, it's going to solve this. But let's be clear, I'm not a doctor, okay? So I don't know these things. And I had and in our part of town, right, in this part of the state, we were hit very hard by the opioid epidemic, right? People that I went through these schools with that no longer live here today, you know, that are not live here, that no longer exist on this earth today, were hit hard by the opioid epidemic, right? And there's something to be said about the fact that it didn't just hit like people in lower socioeconomic standing, right? It hit everybody. You could have been a doctor yourself and it hit you because of the method in which it came to our society. And that's a big problem, right? And it shows that. And even if we remove something that's this hot button of a topic, we just look at antibiotics, right? They have had to increase the level of strength of antibiotics. And I think we've realized as a society that they were kind of overprescribed because we started realizing that there were certain strains of certain colds and infections that were becoming antibiotic resistant, right? So I think that there is definitely some argument to the fact that we are overprescribing responses to certain issues, and that yes, there are more holistic approaches that I think would be beneficial for all of us. But does that mean that we need to, you know, choose one over the other and throw the baby out with the bathwater? Absolutely not. Like, I think we need to try to find a blend of these things where we have, hey, this is the approach. Let's exercise, let's eat healthy, let's do all the things that we should be doing. If that's not working, let's also throw in this medication that's going to assist you that we can hopefully scale you off of as time goes on when we start to see a better response to these things. And I think one of the problems is the institution of healthcare isn't really focused on getting people back to square one. I think they're just more focused on treat the issues, not the cause. And that's an outside opinion. No, there's a lot of doctors out there who are working very hard for us as a society. And again, that's a service that I think, you know, they're well compensated, but that's a service that I think we need to appreciate as a society as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we even see it like in the lingo and the way we speak. Oh, I have OCD. Oh, I have whatever medical condition, you know, ADHD.
Right.
Like people just use this in their common speaking. I have like I'm having a mental crisis right now.
Yeah.
People very much, or like I'm depressed. That doesn't mean you're like medically depressed. It means like you're sad, which, you know, that's the thing that we all experience. I've been very depressed by that standard. I'm sure you have.
Yeah. There's spectrums, right? It's like the problem is the world is not binary. There are spectrums of everything, right? And so like there's a large degree of areas that you can be on at any given time. Right. And we can all, and I think, yeah, emotionally, physically, everything. Like we try very hard to view the world as black and white, right? And that there's no gray area, but there's lots of gray area. And you know, you have to be careful because there are certain things where we do need to take kind of a binary approach. But for the most part, I think as a people, we would do better to use more descriptive words to diagnose our emotions, right? And to understand, like, to recognize them in a better way. I think that would solve a lot of problems. Like, and this is something that's become very popular in like the podcast culture, but like, you know, I think the Inuits have 22 different words to describe snow, right? Like they have like so many different ways to describe different types of snow because there's so many different kinds, right? Whereas like Americans, it's either snowing or it's not. It's like snow, sleet, hail. That's about it. We've covered it, right? And they have like different words to describe the specific types of snow, right? And like a sommelier, right? If you talk to like a wine sommelier who's describing, a certain the beautiful bodily aroma of a certain Malbec or a Chianti or something like that, right? They're going to use these words that you're sitting there and you're like, wow, that's like super descriptive. I definitely want to drink this. You know what I mean? And I think that if we tried as a society to diagnose our own emotions a little bit better and to focus on things in a kind of more descriptive way about how we're feeling and what things are impacting us and how they're affecting us, I think we would see that there's more of a lexicon of opportunity to broadcast how we're feeling and to respond to it appropriately, if that makes sense.
I think something I've been seeing is people are very, I don't want to say illiterate because I don't think that's the right word, inarticulate in the words they have.
Yeah.
And I think what's happening is people, they don't know how to speak. They don't know how to communicate how they feel, which just makes them these big balls of emotion, which is why they end up just doing emotional things and feeling emotional reactions. But they don't actually know how to articulate and act on what they are feeling.
Yeah, and what you just said has me thinking about this too, because we were talking about how like the phones are a problem, right? So my father passed away while I was on active duty, right? He passed away while I was on active duty, and a couple years later, I transferred into the infantry in the Marine Corps, right? So I went into the infantry, and one of our first exercises, it wasn't even a couple years later, it was like 6 months later. One of our first exercises was what was called a PEX, a patrol exercise, right? And in patrolling, you need to be in the woods. You're hiding in an area where you're gonna not be found, right? So generally, you want to pick kind of one of the grossest areas imaginable that people are not going to want to kind of walk through. So usually like a swamp is a really good spot to be during a patrol exercise. That's where you want to hide your troops. And then from there, you want to conduct harassing attacks on the enemy, right? That's usually what you'd want to do in a patrolling scenario. So, but one of the secondary effects of that is that you're in the woods for a very prolonged period of time where you can't speak, right? Because in patrolling, like say the enemy is, in one area, you want to get very close, be within several hundred meters of them, and be able to just constantly leave your patrol base, which is hopefully in a very gross area that they're not going to naturally detect you there, and just kind of conduct harassing attacks on them, right? That's the goal of patrolling from a military standpoint. So it forces you to just kind of hide out in this really crappy area and not talk to anybody because you can't, right? And I spent like a lot of time in the woods 2 weeks straight where I think I probably had 1 to 2 conversations with anybody, and they lasted about 10 minutes, right? No cell phones, no technology, nothing, right? And I put a lot of issues with the loss of my father to bed during that time period. And I think the reason that I was able to do that is there was no distraction. I was forced to sit with myself and think and talk up here and to process what was going on when I never really had time to do that while I was in mainstream society. And I think we also see this kind of like wanderlust culture is a real big deal in society now. Like these people are like, I want to travel the world and live in a Sprinter van and like just go from natural park to natural park, right? National park to national park. I think that's because people are yearning for opportunities to get away from the confines and restrictions of society and the pressure that it puts on them. So a great action to take or habit to begin for yourself, I would argue, is to kind of institute these times either daily or weekly where technology is shut off and you're alone with your thoughts and you give yourself some time to process whatever is going on up here so that you feel a little bit better. And because I think that very much we don't realize, like very often we don't realize even what's bothering us, like my present company included. There's times where you're just upset, you're angry, you're super excited, and you're sitting there and you're kind of like, why do I feel this way? I don't even know. And I think if you have an opportunity to give yourself time to examine those feelings and those thoughts, it would be better for you mentally and physically, and emotionally.
I think that's what we Jews call the Sabbath. We just get to turn our phones off.
Yeah.
And turn everything. It's the best.
Oh yeah. The Jewish, the concept of the Sabbath, and I've said this for a long time. I don't even know if maybe I've had this conversation with you, but the concept of the Sabbath is a beautiful thing, right? Especially the way that, I mean, not all the Ashkenazi Jews view it this way, but many of the more conservative Jews do, right? And they basically shut off technology, right? And it's a time for Shabbat dinner. You go home and you sit on Friday night and you have dinner with family, and there's no interruptions. And then all day Saturday, all you're doing is going to temple and being with family.
I'm telling you, because I didn't grow up religious, and it's something I've kind of adapted. It's the best. You get to, like, I have to, like, get everything done. It will be done. You finish it this time and you're just off. You're completely shut off for 25 hours. It's the greatest thing. I recommend it to everyone. Turn off your phone for 25 hours. It will change your life.
I completely agree with you. And you don't need to be Jewish to do that, right? Like the Christians technically, you know, our Sabbath is Sunday, right? But unfortunately, we don't shut off for the whole day on Sunday, many of us. It's not a cultural thing. Some of us do though, right? And I think that's a very important thing. And then we have people who just, they choose not to worship, right? They don't have an individual that they worship. And wonderful for you, this is America where you can do that, right? The First Amendment protects that right, and it's part of why I love this country. But associated with that, you need to find some sort of way for you to shut off and disconnect, right? And so if there's not, and this to bring this full circle, this goes into, you have an institution, right? You have the institution of Judeo-Christian values that is forcing you to shut off and to be with family and to hold these things sacred, right? And so as we move away from these institutions, we need to instill these requirements on ourselves if we want to continue to be a successful society. Otherwise, this gap is going to develop, and it's going to be filled with things that I don't think are good or beneficial for us.
I'm going to circle back a little bit. You mentioned your father and when you were in the service. Did he have what was his role in that? Because I assume, you know, dealing with family, especially telling him you want to go into the military. What was his role in that? What lessons did you learn from him?
Yeah, it's a good question. I appreciate that question. So my father grew up in the projects in Jersey City. He was not very well-to-do. He kind of escaped that life and started his own business, right? And so he never graduated high school.
What was his business?
He was an electrical contractor, and he was a pretty big electrical contractor in this town. A lot of people knew him. You know, we did a lot of work in the area and that kind of stuff. He had zero desire for his son to go into the military. He wanted me to be the first generation of the family to graduate college. He wanted me to go off and do things that he could never do, right? That was his desire. In high school, I approached him and said, I want to go into the Marine Corps. He said, smart man, my father was a great negotiator. He was a very smart individual. He said, listen, go to college for 1 year, go for 1 year. If after that first year you still want to go, no problem, right? Now, what kid is going to go to a place where there's no rules, you party all the time, you have a great time, it's just pure fun and happiness, right? And you get to study these cool concepts and learn and do all that, is going to say like, oh, I want to leave this, right? He knew what he was doing. So he sent me to the school and I went there for the first year, freshman year of college, had the most fun in the world, had a blast and really enjoyed it. It was sophomore year that I kind of had this moment where I realized that I had fallen off the path that I had desired for myself and that I needed to get back on it. And then I said I wanted to join the military. But this time I wasn't going to have that conversation with my father. I just kind of went and did it myself, right? So showed up, signed up for the Marine Corps, had a lot of work to do. I was super chunky and out of shape. I was not in a healthy spot. And I had some fitness tests that I had to pass in order to get accepted. But I did sign up for officers candidate school and went home after I signed that letter and told my parents. They broke down in tears at the kitchen table. They were not very happy about that. The Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts were still going on, right? OIF, OEF were still happening. So they were super worried. Their first question was, what job did you sign up for? I told them that I'm hoping to go into the infantry. Then they flipped out even more, right? Because that's like, you know, the front of the tip of the spear of the tip of the spear. But then when I graduated from officers candidate school, when I finally became a Marine, all the fear sort of subsides because there's a lot of pride to fill that void, right? And so a lot of the lessons that I learned from my father did make me very successful during my time in the military, and I owe a lot of that to him. But I think one of the problems that we have is as a society, we're so scared of something bad happening to our children that we prevent them from having the experiences that they need to grow up to become men and women who are going to be contributing members of society. And I think my parents were viewing this as like, we need to protect our baby. But what they really needed to do was let me go to go learn these things and just hope that I would come back and be safe, you know. And unfortunately, it's the risk that you have to take, right? You cannot be a prophet in your own land, right? There's a reason Homer leaves his home country, right, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and is gone for so long until he finally returns, right? The hero's journey, you have to leave, right? And I think more of us need to understand that as parents, that at some point our children have to depart.
And I think I'd add, it's probably even more risky if you don't let them go, because then what will happen? You have people who, I have relatives, I have family who they never let their children go. They're now in their 30s, and they're still children.
We have a bunch of Peter Pans running around. Yeah,
Peter Pans.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
they don't want to grow up.
Yep,
100%. What was your time like in the military? What were some significant moments that happened to you? I know a lot of people have very significant life altering events that happen. What were some of those?
So I never had to fire my rifle in anger, which is a big deal, right? So I always say that I never had to dance with the devil, right? I went into the infantry. I was convinced that by the time, you know, I was a platoon commander, that I was going to be going off into combat, right? And that I was going to be taking my platoon out into Iraq or Afghanistan or somewhere like that. And we were going to be charging off into battle against terrorists, right? By the time I hit the Fleet Marine Force, it was 2015 by the time I hit the Fleet Marine Force, maybe a year earlier, 2014. We went to Operation Eager Lion in Jordan, where we trained the Jordanians in our combat tactics, techniques, and procedures. And that's kind of like a demonstration of force as well. It gives us an opportunity to show the world that we're operating in that area, and that we have the ability to project power into those areas. And then after that, I went and did what was called Forward Deployed. They changed the name of it, but basically it was called Forward Deployed Battalion East, FDB East. And basically what they did is they sent us out to Japan. We lived in Japan for 7 months. We were deployed to Japan. We got on ship and sailed around the South China Sea with host nation forces and conducted amphibious invasions with them, where we would take little ships into beachheads, take beachheads, and then set up a patrol base and conduct activities from there. And the reason that was important was that was during the time that the Chinese were first starting to become very aggressive about the South China Sea, right? And claiming that they had sovereign right to that area and that it was theirs. And so we were sailing around on a I would argue it's one of the least lethal ships that exists in the fleet of naval ships. And we were sailing around on that, and we were being shadowed by a Chinese destroyer, right? So at the time, President Obama launched the USS Green Bay into the South China Sea for the first time, I think, in 50 years. And that ship intercepted the Chinese destroyer that was shadowing us, because that is, in the Navy, movement is like chess, right? One person moves here, the other person moves here. You view things as potentially hostile actions, right? And there's a lot of like warning and posturing, and I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. It's not like on a battlefield where somebody just pulls a trigger and now we're in a gunfight, right? It's a little bit different, where there's a lot of movement around the chessboard. So the fact that a Chinese destroyer was following us was considered somewhat aggressive action by the Chinese Navy, but not to a point that would require aggressive response, right? So what we did is, as a nation, was they launched the USS Green Bay that intercepted the Chinese destroyer that was shadowing us. And the USS Green Bay just basically said, we're going to be testing our naval gunfire weapons, get 500 miles away from us and this ship next to us, which is a non-aggressive way to say, if we happen to hit you with a round, it's your fault because we warned you and we're training in this area, right? And it's also a non-aggressive way to say, we don't respect your belief that you think that you own the waters in this area, right? So that's what I did there, and we would train host nation forces like the Thais, the Malays, the Filipino Marines, who are awesome. They were a lot of fun. And I did all that, and it was a super, super rewarding experience. It made me feel as though I had learned a lot and taught me a lot about leadership and all those kinds of things. And I got to come back to my hometown and live here and not have to deal with any of the moral or mental wounds of war, which I think is a big benefit for me, but to give back what I've learned to people and to the veteran community to assist those people that are struggling with those things, which is my first job out of the military was working with the Department of Veterans Affairs. And so I still do feel as though, you take the uniform off, service is still something that you have to continue to do, because if you don't, you built your entire life around serving your country and your community. If you just drop the uniform and say, I'm done serving, I think there's a huge gap that you have there.
Yeah, and I think you're doing a great job continuing to serve your community and your country. So that's
I appreciate that, Logan. I appreciate that.
My last question I want to ask you about education. Recently, I was reading this book by a man named Booker T. Washington.
Yeah.
It's called Up From Slavery.
Yeah,
it's basically,
great book.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've read it.
Yeah, I have read it, yeah.
So you know what his story is.
Yeah.
And he was very big. He built up a school administrator. What are things that you want to emphasize in education? What is important? And like you're on the school board. I'm sure you went in, these are some things I just want to get, like I'd like to see happen within the school.
Yeah, so my platform for being in serving the community in that capacity specifically was focused on a few things. Number one, it was just supporting what already exists, right? And I think this is a huge problem. Like we meet a lot of people who they're like, there's all these problems with all these things and I'm going to get out there and fix them, right? The school district in Ocean Township has existed for, almost 100 years, right? My mother, I don't remember, my mother attended the Oakhurst Country Day School, right?
Yeah.
But so that school has been around for a very long time. It's going to be around these schools are going to be around for a much longer time than you or I will, right? This institution will exist for a very long time. So I want to start with that. This district has figured out how to be successful regardless of the people that were on the board, right? And there were a lot of individuals who were administrators and teachers, right? And this is the big thing. Like, I really think it has to do with the people who are teachers, right? The people who are doing very simple things every day to move the needle forward for our students. Things that are not recognized, things that maybe even those teachers don't realize are making a huge difference, which happened for me in this district, right? I had teachers who taught me how to do public speaking. I had teachers who dressed me down about the fact that my public speaking wasn't up to caliber to what it should have been, right? And forced me to push that needle forward.
Mr. Telesky.
Yes, exactly. He is the one who did that to me. Yes, Mr. T. He did did a great job and made me, and I would argue that my skills as a public speaker are directly related to him pushing me to move that needle forward and to get better at those things, right? To having teachers like Mr. Polano who showed me that there were deadlines for production and things like that you had to meet, and that if you missed the mark, that was it. It was binary. You either met your production deadline or you didn't, and you aired on time or you didn't, right? And so I bring this up to say that there are individuals that are making very small impacts on you guys on a daily basis that are having a massive beneficial effect on our district and on our school community. And I think that those are the people that need to be appreciated. We just view people who serve on the Board of Education as these super integral parts of the success of the district because they're at the top, arguably. And I don't think really we are. We're up there to serve you all. It's up for you all to tell us what we need to run this district effectively and to learn from you all what we need to do and what support we need to give you to ensure that this school continues to put out students like yourselves, students like Mr. Polano and myself, right, who are going to continue to give back to society and to our community. Specifically, though, to answer your question so it doesn't look like I dodged it, security is a huge priority of mine. It always has been, right? I think that that's a very important part. I think that the board, right? I do nothing on my own, okay? The entire board has to make a decision, and anything I say here today doesn't speak on behalf of the Board of Education of Ocean Township. But that being said, the board has decided to implement more security controls at these schools to keep all of you guys safe. And I really, really push them to do that. But as a board, we decided to, and we put a priority on security and safety in our district. I think that was a big deal. And then the last thing is the pre-K program, right? The return on investment that we see in education is the greatest between the ages of 2 to 5. Okay. Also, we are in a district that is struggling with enrollment. It is declining in this district. Everybody has a million reasons for why they think that is. Honestly, I've looked into a lot of things. It's actually very hard to determine specifically what it is, although we do have an idea of a couple of things that are causing this, right? I'm a big believer that if you get someone in as from a business perspective, for lack of a better term, because education is not a business, and I think that's very important. But if you get a customer in, right, to begin with, they are there. It's very hard for them to leave, right? They're not going to leave. So if we can start to get young families into the district at a very early age and to understand that we're pushing the needle even further with their kids at the time when it means the most, they're going to want to stay within this district for a much longer time. And hopefully that solves an enrollment issue, right? But also just from a pure economics perspective, giving a mother and a father free pre-K, which arguably is not free. The taxpayer is paying for that. I would make the argument that the district is not paying for it, right? And that it's coming out of a grant from a higher level, right? So we're not utilizing our budget to pay for it, but giving that to a parent is hitting the lottery for them, right? Like they are literally getting an additional $10,000 to $20,000 per student added back into their paycheck at the end of the year because they're not spending it on a private pre-K system. And so those are my priorities, and those are the things I think are most important. But I can't drive home enough that really I just got on the board to be a vehicle to help serve the people that are here and to say, what do we need to do? What kind of support can we give you so that we can just continue moving forward, and so that the Big Red family, which is like my big thing, right? The Big Red family can be as strong as it ever was. Because that is a beautiful thing that we have at this school, this concept of the Spartan legacy and the legend of the Big Red, right? Those are things that were created by people before us, and they made this school what it was. And I think it needs to continue because kids from Ocean Township have always been very proud to be from Ocean Township. And I think that needs to continue. We need our students to continue leaving here and looking back and thinking fondly of the culture and the legacy that was created in the school system and the family that they were a part of. I think it's a very important thing.
All right. Well, it looks like our time is about wrapping up. I wanted to ask, so I know I watched you had an Ocean Talk episode where you were going around, and I really appreciated that. There was a quote you said. I'm struggling to remember it. You texted it to me once. It was about the way you need to speak what you think. I'm trying to think. Was it Edgar Allan Poe? I think. I'm not too sure.
I think it was.
I need to pull it up.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. It is not Edgar Allan Poe.
Why
you
am
put
I?
me on the spot, Logan, but I know what
I'm
it is.
sorry.
No. It was.
I've tried looking at it, but the text didn't show up because I changed my.
It's from Self-Reliance, an essay by Ralph Waldo Emerson. What I must do concerns me and not what the people think.
Right.
That's the quote. What I must do concerns me and not what the people think. Well, I think that at times an individual has to make a decision that they are going to do something that is maybe frowned upon by society, or that the group does not approve of because they legitimately believe that it is what is right based on their values that they have, right? Which goes against the entire discussion that we've had surrounding narcissism today, right? Because that's a very narcissistic trait to engage in, right? But I think one of the major issues that we have is that people are, in their growing narcissism, they're less likely to take a stand on certain topics and say, no, this is legitimately what I believe here. I think that what you were saying is wrong. I'm not saying that that makes me right, but I am saying that it's not something that I'm going to support, right? But I also, on the scale of us discussing military service and things like that, for a long time, there were a lot of people who told me that I was very stupid for trying to go into the military, right? And there's even people who tell you that you're very stupid for trying to do X or Y. I don't know why anybody would want to be a board member, right? That's what you hear people say. Like, you're going to have parents yelling at you. Yes, but I believe that this is correct. I believe it's the appropriate action to engage in. So I must do what concerns me and not what the people think. Yes. I put a higher precedence on service to my people over the petty problems that will exist due to that service, if that makes sense.
All right. Well,
I can't believe I pulled that out of nowhere.
That was great.
Yeah. Whew, feeling good. I almost forgot it too, and then I remembered it. Nailed it. Nailed it.
All right. Thank you very much for coming on.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Logan.